So we've already heard quite a bit the Google Tensor G3 that will be running, powering the upcoming Google Pixel 8 and 8 Pro. Today in this video, we're going to be taking a much closer look at the cameras on the Pixel 8 and 8 Pro. And there are some fairly substantial upgrades to be had here. Obviously, when we've talked about the Tensor G3, we've talked about how the cores being used in that processor are much newer cores. And by that, you're going to get a pretty substantial performance upgrade. The Tensor G1 and G2 are both using fairly old technology, and that is kind of going away now as the G3 kind of brings itself much more on par with the modern stuff that Snapdragon is bringing in, although probably not going to be quite as fast as whatever the newest Snapdragon chip is, but still should be a pretty substantial performance upgrade. And that has left people wondering, what is Google doing with the rest of the device? Are we going to see a similar bump in performance with things like the camera performance? Well, today we have this article on Android Authority, which is brought to you by Camilla. Once again, this individual has been leaking stuff about Pixels for a while now and is absolutely crushing this stuff. They actually are the ones that brought some of the most recent leaks about the Tensor G3, kind of confirming some of the earlier stuff that we had reported on this channel already from some other sources. So let's take a moment and let's deep dive into the Google Pixel 8 and 8 Pro camera specs. So we have this nice graphic here to start off with, Pixel 8 Pro here and Pixel 8 Standard there on the right. So let's start with the standard one first because there are fewer cameras to go over there. The biggest thing that has changed on the Pixel 8 versus the 7 is that primary sensor. You can look right there. That's where it's kind of highlighted. The GN2 is what we are now going to be using with the Pixel 8. With the Pixel 7, it was the ISOCELL GN1. We've literally just gone from the GN1 to the GN2. It's a newer version, a newer upgraded version of that same camera sensor, and it should be a fairly decent improvement. Okay, so the sensor is about 35% larger. Well, what does a larger sensor get you? Well, it gets you more light being captured, and more light being captured is useful for all sorts of things like shutter speed. You don't have to have the shutter open quite as long because it's capturing light more quickly. So you shorten that shutter speed, you make it quicker. What does that do? Well, it makes your photos more in focus. Motion blur isn't as big of a problem because it can just take that picture that much quicker. Better detail, better low light performance. All of these things should be true with the GN2 sensor. What about the ultra wide camera? It is the IMX 386, and I'm kind of looking over at my notes here to make sure that this is something that indeed has not changed. And indeed, it appears to be the exact same sensor as it was before. However, Camilla is reporting in this article that they may be doing some work there with the lens to make it a slightly wider field of view, which is a good idea. Personally, I think if you're doing an ultra wide, you should go as ultra wide as you can. Almost push that limit towards a fisheye lens and really do something crazy with it. Otherwise, what's the point of having it? If it's only a little bit wider than your standard camera, I don't really care all that much. So if you're going to do wide, let's go super wide. The rest of this should be pretty much the same. I believe that's the same time of flight sensor, microphone, flash, pretty standard stuff. What about on the Pixel 8 Pro? Well, we have some more changes here as well. So obviously we're getting the same GN2 primary sensor. All the things I've just said about that are going to be true here. Now looking at the ultra wide though, this is a big difference. We're now using the IMX 787, and if that sounds familiar to you, it's because that's the same primary sensor that we now have in the Pixel 7a. And when you compare it to the 386, that is a sensor that is nearly twice as large, which again, just like we said with the GN2 versus the GN1, all those advantages are going to be here. Better detail, better low light, quicker shutter speed, less blur. All of these things will be true. And it's a 64 megapixel sensor, so it's shooting at a much higher resolution, which means you can pixel bin, and that results in much larger super pixels. So all around, the ultra wide on the Pixel 8 Pro should be a massive upgrade over the ultra wide on the Pixel 7 Pro or the Pixel 7. It is also an even wider field of view than we have on the Pixel 8. So the Pixel 8 went wider, the Pixel 8 Pro is going to go even wider than that. Great stuff here by Google if all of this does line up to be true. Love seeing that stuff. What about the telephoto? It is the GM5 48 megapixel 5x optical zoom, and it appears as though that is pretty much unchanged from the Pixel 7 Pro. And honestly, there's not a whole lot you can really do there at that point other than pushing it to a higher optical zoom, like the S23 line, the Ultra line, I should say, has their 10x zoom. This is staying at 5x, but because it's a 48 megapixel sensor shooting at such a higher resolution, I have found that when you do 10x on the Ultra phones from Samsung and 10x, which is a hybrid zoom at that point, 5x optical plus 5x digital on the Pixel Pro devices, they wind up looking remarkably similar. So hopefully they can continue to improve things with their software side of things, because the sensor, the lens appear to be staying pretty much the same for that. Now, another change though will be to the time of flight sensor. It is changing to one that is apparently far more capable, and that should allow things like focusing to happen much more reliably and much more quickly. Now, bear in mind, this is only happening with the Pixel 8 Pro. The Pixel 8 Standard, I believe, is keeping the same time of flight sensor as before. Luckily, focusing has never really been a big problem for me on my Pixel 7 Pro, but an upgrade is always welcome. Now, we also have this thermometer, MLX90632. And let me scroll down here and we'll talk about this a little bit. The Pixel 8 thermometer is just a thermometer, so you can kind of see what's being said here. A lot of people wondered, is this basically like a FLIR camera, a thermal imaging camera? No, this is just a thermometer. And what they're going to be using it for, I don't really know. Maybe this was something that was in the works when COVID was more of a thing than it is now. Obviously, COVID is still a bit of a thing, but maybe that was kind of the thinking, was you can kind of use it to check your temperature when you're going into work. I don't really honestly know what the point of this is going to be. Google's going to have to convince me that this is something that's useful, because right now, in my mind, this does not seem all that useful. Overall, I think these are some pretty substantial improvements for these new devices. You spend most of your time using that primary sensor, and it's getting a pretty big upgrade. It's a generational upgrade, right? It's Gen 1 to Gen 2. It's bigger, it's faster. This is a better sensor. With the ultra-wide stuff, I love widening things out, and with the Pro, that new sensor might be a really big improvement as well. I'm fairly excited for the Pixel 8 at this point. We've seen some internals improvements. Now some camera improvements are there as well. Can't wait to see what Google does on the software side of things as well. What wacky software features do we get? Cannot wait to see that event. Now, guys, there are some additional details in this article, things that might be happening with the Gcam software, details about 8K and things like that. But rather than talking about them in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a link to the original article down below, because what I want you to do is I want you to go click on that article and read it yourself and see some of those additional details there, because Camilla with Android Authority did the reporting, and it just feels wrong for me to take all that information and bring it to you here and not send you to the original article, because they deserve that click. They deserve whatever little bit of revenue you get from that individual click from you guys. So please go do that if you will. I'll be obviously talking about Pixel 8 and more things like this as we head towards that launch later in fall. Pixel Fold will be in the house as soon as that does get delivered at the end of this month. So you're going to want to be subscribed to see all of that content as it does happen. Guys, I will see you on the next one. And until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.